joined, he maintained, by a vast company of fellow protesters who mostly voted Tory at the last election.
Tonight, medical tests are being carried out both here and in Spain after the deaths of 3 British tourists who are believed to be victims of yet another outbreak of Legionnaire's disease. A 4th tourist is seriously ill, and once again the probable source of infection is a tourist hotel on the Spanish Mediterranean coast, this time the Tropicana Gardens in Benidorm. So what is this pneumonia-like infection which crops up in the headlines with such frightening regularity? Well, the disease first came to the world's attention at a Philadelphia hotel 5 years ago. A reunion of ex-servicemen from the American Legion, hence the disease's name. 183 of them, mainly rather elderly. Once the disease struck, it did so with a vengeance. 34 Legionnaires died. It seemed a mystery disease and a killer. It led British doctors to reopen a case from 3 years before on the Spanish Costa Blanca. Some British holidaymakers had died from causes that weren't satisfactorily explained. They had been staying at the Rio Park Hotel. Last year, the same hotel was again associated with the disease. 30 people were taken ill, 1 actually died. But the disease doesn't just occur in Spanish holiday hotels. It's here on our doorstep. Figures for England and Wales show an alarming rise in the number of cases of Legionnaire's disease. In 1977, there were 25 recorded cases. In 1978, that figure grew to 77. And in 1979, it jumped to 124. Last year, there were at least 178 confirmed cases, making a total of just over 400 overall, of which 10% are thought to have been fatal. Now, it's a bacterium, not a virus, that causes all the trouble, and it lives in water. And the outbreaks often occur in hotels or hospitals because institutions like these have large water storage systems which can harbour it. Take the average large hospital. Now, this contains at least 2 major stores of water which might contain the organism. One, the water storage tank, which provides the building with its hot and cold supply coming through taps and showers. Now, since people pick up the disease by inhaling fine water droplets in air and not by drinking, a shower is a very likely source of disease. The second store is in the cooling tower, where air is drawn over warm water which comes from a hospital's refrigeration system. A fan at the top of that may draw out an infected water vapor mixture. This could pass into the building through an outside fan which draws air into the ventilation system, or even just through an open window. Well, so far so bad. Legionnaire's disease seems to have a distinct and peculiar epidemiology. It strikes with varying impact on different people in a random pattern. Well, that was the impression until the British Medical Journal published a report tucked away in its February issue on the disease. The conclusions were rather disturbing. 3 doctors chose 24 British hospitals and hotels at random. None had been previously associated with the disease, but they found that 5 of them, that's 20%, had the Legionnaire's bacteria somewhere in their water systems. In other words, it's far more prevalent than anyone had previously imagined. And the doctors concluded there's no question of making expensive changes to water systems where the bacteria exists, but where the disease has not struck. And they suggest that research should ask different questions, such as why does such a common germ cause disease on some occasions but not on others, and why are some people far more susceptible than others to it? Well, Dr. Anthony Taylor, perhaps you could answer some of those questions. Why does it appear to cause disease on some occasions and not on others?
Well, it may be that some people are more susceptible than others.
Old people?
Yes, it's been established since the Philadelphia outbreak that people in the over 50 age group are more susceptible than the under 50s.
And on what sort of occasions does it seem to work? I mean, why, for example, on the Mediterranean coast?
Well, one of the things which is certainly critical is the temperature, the ambient temperature. And Legionnaire's disease, unlike many other forms of pneumonia, shows a summer predominance. And it may be that the bacterium is able to multiply when the ambient temperature rises to the sort of Mediterranean temperatures which we see in the early and later on in the summer.
Is it actually a more acute form of pneumonia, other things being equal?
Well, it has a fairly acute onset. The incubation time is from 2 to 10 days, which makes it a fairly rapid onset of disease.
And is it harder to treat than conventional pneumonia?
Well, if treatment is sought early, then the treatment is usually successful. But in a few cases, due to underlying disease or perhaps late diagnosis or awareness of the disease, then it can be fatal because of this delay.
Are there different antibiotics from those usually used on conventional pneumonia which you use on Legionnaires?
Well, the antibiotics which are recommended are certainly not particularly exotic, and they would have been used by some doctors before the awareness of this particular antibiotic in the treatment for Legionnaire's disease became evident.
In what sense did Legionnaire's disease, so to say, begin in Philadelphia? I mean, had it really not been heard of before then?
Well, no, it hadn't been heard of before then, but now we know that it did exist, at least in the 1940s. But I think what was really required in order to elucidate the pattern of this particular disease and what caused it was a major outbreak, because the bacterium is slightly odd. It's really a soil or a water organism. It's not really a common disease-causing organism for man, and it needed intensive study using unusual techniques in order to make the discovery known.
You say this is a disease, this is a soil-borne organism. Do you relate that to the fact that it seems to be cropping up with a fair degree of regularity at a new town like Benidorm?
Well, it may be that the rapid construction periods which have gone on in resorts like Benidorm have in some way contributed to the appearance of the bacterium in plumbing systems and so on. But how the bacterium actually gets into the plumbing systems and what particular factors enable it to stay there and multiply and eventually in some cases cause disease, we don't know yet.
It could, do you think, actually be in domestic homes in Britain?
It's quite possible, and one has to bear in mind that although the outbreaks are the cases which get the attention, that most of the cases in Britain are in fact sporadic cases, and nobody has been able to isolate, nobody has been able to implicate in these isolated cases any particular origin for the bacterium, and it could be in the home, it could be anywhere.
But we shouldn't be actually worried, frightened of the domestic shower.
No, I don't think so, any more than one should be frightened of one's own back garden where other bacteria lurk which are capable of causing particularly nasty diseases, like tetanus, for example.
Dr. Taylor, thank you very much.
Thank you.
David.
The law is traditionally and famously an ass, but not today it wasn't. When Ursula Hurley applied for a job as a part-time waitress in a London bistro, she was shown the door because she had children. Edward Mustoe, the restaurateur, says rather breezily that working mothers are unreliable. Fatal error. A judge at the Employment Appeal Tribunal today said Mr. Mustoe had not assessed Mrs. Hurley as an individual. He hadn't checked her references, asked if she'd proved reliable in the past, or who would look after her children while she worked. He'd broken the Sex Discrimination Act by generalising, by deciding against her because she was a mother. At Edward's Bistro in London's Kentish Town, the unwitting Mr. Mustoe added a footnote to British legal history. As for Mrs. Hurley, she spoke for all working mothers.
I'm sure most of them are sort of sighing a great sigh of relief. However, I don't think for one moment that it's going to stop employers discriminating against women with children, but perhaps they won't do it quite so openly as Mr. Mustoe did. I will be more delighted when the Sex Discrimination Act is officially amended, inserting a clause specifically relating to working women with children.
Mr. Justice Brown Wilkinson's judgment in Mrs. Hurley's favour should help the Equal Opportunities Commission to clarify the law. The Commission wants the law amended to exclude precisely discrimination against women simply because they have family responsibilities. Until today, the courts have been reluctant to help the Mrs. Hurleys of this world. The building societies today cut their mortgage rate for borrowers by 1% to 13%, one welcome consequence of an otherwise bleak budget. For investors in building societies, whose money provides cash for the loans, interest rates dropped 0.75% to 8.5%. Still competitive, the building societies hope, with granny bonds and other government offerings. The hijacked Pakistani airliner, with its 101 people on board, exhausted and stinking into their 13th day, still stands at Damascus Airport as of this moment. But their ordeal, unexpected obstacles apart, is nearing the end. The trio of hijackers and General Zia's Pakistani government have made a deal. 49 political prisoners from Pakistani jails are being flown to Libya in exchange for the hostages. The Libyans have just announced their willingness to accept the plane load of detainees. For the Damascus hostages, the end of the world's longest hijack story is in sight. The atmosphere today relaxed a little. A cleaner was allowed aboard the plane. Breakfast and cigarettes followed. A humanitarian solution, but at a price. that of surrender to blackmail, a dangerous precedent?
Well, I would say that the consequences, you know, if there was no agreement, whether you might call it a compromise or you might call it from humanitarian point of view, that after all, about more than 100 people, 110, 111, who have been in the plane for nearly 10 to 11 days, they have suffered, and if they were allowed to suffer more, then purely from the humanitarian point of view, I think that could have been regarded a bigger crime.
Well, maybe. It's a moot point. Turks, Germans and Israelis would probably not agree. The mystery of which anti-thre group has masterminded this hijack still remains. The Pakistan government insists that Murtaza Bhutto, son of the late Pakistani leader, executed on thre's orders, is the man behind it all. That he was on the plane when it flew from Kabul to Damascus, that he is there in Syria now. Well, several of the Bhutto family's supporters have denied these allegations, not least here on Newsnight. We'll probably know the answer pretty soon.
Most of us still associate Scotland's Western Isles, such as the Hebrides, with havens of remoteness and peace. But depending on the outcome of a public inquiry that starts on Monday, the island of Lewis could end up the home of a fully fledged NATO airbase. Now, that depends on whether the inquiry gives permission to the Ministry of Defence to upgrade the existing airport to quite new specifications and purposes. George Younger, Secretary of State for Scotland, will ultimately decide, but the inquiry is limited to planning matters. Donald Stewart, the local MP, wants questions of national security to be included as well. In their absence, he and local opponents fear the inquiry can only be a whitewash. Strategically, the Royal Air Force sees the modernisation of Stornoway as a vital strengthening of NATO's defence on the west coast. At present, RAF bases exist on the east coast, that's at Leuchars and Lossiemouth. They have none, though, facing the Atlantic. Many of the islanders, though, see the Stornoway plan as part of a rash of defence developments on Scotland's west coast, which could destroy their way of life and turn them into primary targets in the northern theatre of war over the Atlantic. David Lomax now reports on the Stornoway controversy.
When storm force winds rage across the North Atlantic, the first point of Britain they usually meet at this time of year is a low-lying mass of peat, bog and granite called Lewis, the largest island in the Outer Hebrides. Lewis has a population of about 25,000 people. Many still live in isolated crofts, and all have an understandable reputation for stubborn independence. The ancient language of Gaelic is still widely spoken, and its cultural traditions jealously preserved. In Stornoway, the largest town, there's an enthusiastic Gaelic choir specialising in the so-called mouth music. The old wartime airport near Stornoway is the island's principal link with the mainland. Whenever the weather allows, there are occasional inter-island services and a few elderly British Airways Viscounts. From London, it's more than 600 miles to Stornoway, and as is often pointed out here, it's cheaper to fly to New York. The islanders of Lewis have long grown accustomed to the simplicity of Stornoway Airport. But now, the Ministry of Defence, which owns the airfield, want to make improvements. They plan to extend the runway to take Tornado and Phantom jet fighters, to build taxiways and bomb-proof aircraft shelters. They also want to install an underwater fuel pipeline into the nearby bay, new fuel storage tanks and new barrack blocks. The cost of turning Stornoway into a standby NATO base in case of war would be £40 million.
The case has not properly been put by the Ministry of Defence. And if they would put that case properly, it may well be that we would see the need for such military expansion. We do not see the need. The government are not explaining to us what that need is, and therefore we must have the gravest doubts about what they are doing.
The RAF claims that Stornoway is strategically important because in any conventional war it could control the gap between Scotland and Iceland, the Soviet Navy's main outlet from their port at Murmansk to the North Atlantic. In the last few years, RAF Nimrod reconnaissance aircraft from bases on the east coast of Scotland have been shadowing an increasing number of Russian naval ships here. And every week they're also intercepting an average of at least 3 Soviet submarines. The RAF's Phantom jet fighters are also regularly scrambled to intercept Russian reconnaissance aircraft. For more than 10 years, Soviet long-range jets have been patrolling the boundaries of NATO's air defense system, and contacts have become a familiar exercise. Now, however, the RAF claims that this strategic balance is being seriously upset. The new threat, they say, is the Tupolev long-range backfire bomber. The backfire can fly at twice the speed of sound, and NATO claims that about 150 of them have been deployed in Soviet Air Force squadrons on the Kola Peninsula.
These backfire bombers have got the range to go much further, to leave the Kola Peninsula and transit down through the North Atlantic and come in through the back door, if you like.
But couldn't you still intercept them from your present bases at Kinloss and Lossiemouth and the other ones?
You could, but you stand a much better chance if you can deploy your forces forward. And this is where Stornoway has become so important.
Stornoway's Hardy Rugby Club is fortunate in having a pitch on the airport itself. It's one of the few patches of flat ground on the island and has been loaned to them by the Ministry of Defence, who in 1938, as is still remembered here, compulsorily purchased the land in the first place. 3 years ago, Mr. Angus McCormack, a local school teacher, was refereeing a game on the airport when he noticed a small scrap of official paper pinned to a nearby gate post. It was an MOD application for planning clearance for what at first appeared to be only minor changes. Suspicions were immediately aroused.
Their initial plan was for a very small extension and an additional pipeline. That was in 1977. And since then, this has been upgraded. Until now, we have, in fact, a major NATO-based configuration to be established at Stornoway. And we do not believe that they will have this major base configuration without actually having aircraft stationed here.
The Army's rocket range at Benbecula on the Uist Islands to the south of Lewis also aroused their fears. 30 years ago, the Ministry of Defence told local people that only a small installation would be required. Now, there's a full-scale base there.
They made statements like, there will be no crofting land lost. And this was absolutely wrong because they were talking in terms of thousands of acres of ground. And there is no way in which you can take ground in the Uists to that extent without taking crofting land away. And in fact, they have taken extensive areas of crofting land away.
That's very attractive. I think the fact too that this one is in Gaelic as well as English is, would give a convey an added strength.
Stornoway's Keep NATO Out committee decided to do all they could to frustrate the RAF's plans and started a noisy and articulate protest campaign. Last year, the KNO supporters in Lewis travelled all over the island collecting signatures for a petition. 4,000 people signed, and no fewer than 2,000 protest letters were sent to the Scottish office. Meanwhile, the Western Isles Council were bombarded with other letters. They were not impressed by the Ministry of Defence's promises that no aircraft would be based at Stornoway in peacetime and that there was no intention to turn the airfield into a permanent base.
We have no reason to believe what they are saying is going to be correct, and our experience proves that even they, although they may sincerely mean it at the time, they cannot foretell the future to such an extent that they can categorically say that they will never use it even in peacetime. And indeed, I have to say that at least one representative of the Ministry of Defence did say, and quite specifically, that he was only talking about present plans as foreseen, and he could give no commitment that these plans wouldn't be changed in the future.
The public inquiry is to be held in the convening chamber of the Western Isles Council. Under the island's motto, "Righteousness exalteth a nation," and in front of equipment capable of simultaneously translating English and Gaelic, 100 observers and various QCs will debate the RAF's case.
Our strategy and our defence deployments are a matter really for the Ministry of Defence, not for local Western Isles and Island Council. The matters which really are pertinent to the people in Stornoway and the island of Lewis are the environmental impact that the changes to the forward operating base at Stornoway are going to be brought about by that. And those are the points which will be addressed at the public inquiry.
We do not believe at all in this modern day and age, if we're going to believe in democracy, that the government should have the right to impose developments of this type in small rural communities, or any other community for that nature, in order to satisfy the whims of MOD chiefs who don't really care very much about the feelings of the local people.
No, I think Mr. Younger has made it very clear that, in fact, he has an open mind about it, and that there will be a fair and frank debate on the matter in March, and then a decision will be made.
In law, the Ministry of Defence don't need planning permission to extend Stornoway because they own the airport as it is. But even if the public inquiry did find against the plan, what worries many people here is that the Secretary of State for Scotland could cite reasons of national security and simply overturn the verdict. And if that were to happen, it's difficult to see what anyone in Lewis could do once Whitehall got its way.
That report from David Lomax. Well, tonight's top sports story is, of course, cricket, and with the latest test details, David Icke. David?
Yes, news of the third test match in Barbados between England and the West Indies. I say the third test, strictly speaking, of course, it's the second, because the Guyana match was cancelled after the Robin Jackman incident. Well, Jackman was making his test debut as England tried to square the series at 1-1, and he made a good start. Michael Blakey now reports from Bridgetown.
Ian Botham won the toss and put in the West Indies. He made the same decision in the first test, and England lost by an innings and 79 runs. Greenwich crashed the ball into the stand, and the question was, would the Botham gamble pay off? And then came the moment that Robin Jackman had been waiting for the whole of his long career, his first ball in Test cricket, and it looked impressive as it beat Greenwich. What happened next was more than Jackman could have dreamed of, the fifth ball of his first over. The ball beat Greenwich, Gooch took the catch, and at 35 years old, Robin Jackman was in the Test match record books. With Greenwich gone, the great Viv Richards came to the wicket. Graham Dilley came storming in. Botham took the catch, Richards had gone for a duck. It was more than any English supporters could have hoped for, and at 25 for 2, West Indies were in trouble. Jackman had bowled beautifully, maintaining good line and length, but Haynes looked settled. He was delighted with his first wicket, and here he got his second as Bairstow took the catch. West Indies were 47 for 3, and Botham's gamble had certainly paid off. Not many people had given England a hope in this match. Botham came back for his second spell at the other end. Mattis had made 16. West Indies had crumbled to 65 for 4. But if the morning belonged to England, the afternoon was dominated by Clive Lloyd, who thrashed the England bowlers. His aggression pulled West Indies out of trouble as he raced to a quick 50.
And by the close, the West Indies were 238 for 7, with Clive Lloyd dismissed by Jackman for 100. Still with cricket, Kim Hughes has been named as Australian captain for this summer's tour to England to replace Greg Chappell, who's staying at home because of business commitments. On Wednesday, you may remember, we highlighted the case of Jean-Marc Bouret, the French rugby union player who was accused of breaking the game's strict amateur rules. Well, Bouret has been suspended pending an investigation by the French authorities into allegations backed by documentary evidence that Bouret was paid to play rugby league before he changed to union. The International Board, which ended its annual meeting in Cardiff today, will now await the outcome of the French inquiry before deciding the long-term future of Bouret. The board also made a series of changes in the laws. For the first time, amateur rugby league players can play rugby union. International caps can now be awarded for games against the lesser rugby nations like Romania, Argentina, Fiji and Japan. And there are a series of changes to improve safety.
We've tightened up the tackle law and altered it, and we've changed the binding in the front row of the scrum to try and prevent the collapsing of the scrum, because the two areas occur often in the tackle, which leads to the pile-up and damage there, and of course in the collapse of the scrum. We've also outlawed the single stud at the toe of boot, and we have set up a committee with manufacturers, medical experts, and rugby administrators, and to try and evolve a type of stud where the durability and the wear will be much safer.
We here in Wales. Mickey Steele-Bodger on today's changes in rugby union. Well, Prince Charles took to the saddle at Sandown today looking for his first steeplechase winner, and the omens looked pretty favourable. Lady Diana Spencer was there to see her fiancé's race, along with Princess Margaret and the Queen Mother. His horse was called Good Prospect and had never fallen in more than 20 previous races. The Prince, making his first appearance on Good Prospect following the death of his horse Alibar, was keeping quietly out of trouble. But then it was Friday the 13th, and a mile from home, the Prince and his horse parted company, and he'll have to wait a little longer for that first winner.
Anyway, you've got the photographs you wanted.
Oh, no. But while his pride may have been hurt, the Prince came through the experience relatively unscathed, as he explained afterwards.
Sir, could we have just one comment on the race, please?
Like
Well, what was it like?
Well, it's marvellous, but, you know, every now and then it happens. You fall off. So it happened, unfortunately. But she's gone.
Sorry about that. Do you think you were just unlucky?
Yes. Well, you know, it was the first time I'd ridden the horse in a race. You've got to find out a little bit what they're like. And now I know a lot more than I did before, put it that way.
Prince Charles, but he'll soon be back. Well, there were 4 football results tonight, all in the 4th Division, and this is how they finished. There were draws at Doncaster and Peterborough, a fine win for the leaders Southend against Halifax, and a fine game, it would seem, at Northampton, who shared 6 goals with Scunthorpe. And that's the sport tonight.
Now, last week we reported on the long-running war in the Philippines between government forces and Muslim secessionists, but the country is now also troubled by another worsening conflict between communist guerrillas and right-wing groups, with serious consequences for the civilians who are caught in between the two. Reports today speak of the evacuation of some 20,000 inhabitants from one region to escape the constant danger. And it's a further symptom of the powerful social and religious tensions that continue to rack the country following the abandonment of martial law by the Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos. From the Philippines, this report by Jim Biddulph.
In this graveyard in the tiny town of Cabancalan, local priests say they've buried 25 murdered people. They accuse the authorities of killing them. 7 died in one incident. Picked out at a dance by unknown but uniformed men, their bodies were later found under the pigsty of a local farm. They had been bound and probably buried alive. Their crime was to upset a powerful feudal hierarchy allied with the police and military. Far away in the capital, Manila, the problems of islands like Negros seem remote and exaggerated.
It is possible that there are some who may have been killed, and this is not the policy of the state. We investigate anything. This is true not only in the Philippines, it's true in England, it's true in the United States, it's true everywhere else. There are allegations always of police brutality and police excesses, but the important thing is whether the state is doing anything about it. And of course, the first persons to be blamed seem to be the soldiers, when it is possible that the New People's Army, the communist armed groups, could have committed the crime.
The New People's Army, the Maoist resistance movement, is strong on Negros. The hill villages around Cabancalan provide a breeding ground for sympathizers looking for relief from grasping plantation owners, corrupt officials, and violence. The New People's Army has even attracted a few young priests, disgusted by what they regard as the failure of the church hierarchy to better the condition of the people. The Philippines' most influential church figure is Cardinal Sin. A more cautious man than many of his colleagues, he's tried to build a bridge between church and state. He recognizes undoubted economic progress in the Philippines and believes that with the recent ending of martial law, the observance of human rights can only improve.
It has to be gradual because, you know, after fasting for so long a time, you were deprived of your freedom for 8 years. And if you eat immediately after fasting, there will be indigestion. So it has to be gradual.
Back on Negros, they may not wait. The midnight murders are the extreme end of a social system which, ever since the days when the Philippines was a Spanish colony, have kept wages minimal and power in a few hands. The sugar plantations are owned by politically influential families. They don't want change, and they blame the church for fomenting trouble. In particular, the landowners are anxious to curb the growth of the sugar workers' unions, which are making ever louder demands for higher wages and better conditions. So the Pope's open encouragement of the union when he went to Negros caused considerable anger, with the plantation owners claiming that local churchmen had unduly influenced his speech.
The constant teaching of the church that workers have a right to unite in free associations for the purpose of defending their interests and contributing as responsible partners to the common good.
Under martial law, it was all too easy to deal with troublemakers. There are now hopes that the worst abuses, the beatings and torture and burial in pigsty graves, will end. The skeptics say that the president retains huge powers. Others, like Cardinal Sin, believe President Marcos cannot halt progress on human rights, even if he wanted to.
I think gradually the opening has been begun. The moment you open it, because Marcos has lifted martial law, he cannot close it already.
You think he cannot close it?
I think if he closes it, there will be trouble.
And tomorrow's weather, and not a lot to look forward to, I'd say. For the south, Wales and the centre, rather cloudy with outbreaks of rain. The east coast from the Humber northwards will be grey and misty. Most of Scotland and Northern Ireland will have some sunny periods with showers developing later. A little apology. We're sorry we couldn't bring you our report on whether the government may reduce the lead content in petrol, as we said earlier tonight on BBC Two, but we hope to have it in Newsnight sometime next week. The first editions of some of the Fleet Street papers are in, and you can see that the tabloids have, of course, got some marvellous photo coverage of Charles's accident, the Mirror and the Sun and the Express. The Financial Times takes up the Brocklebank Fowler story, Tory MP to quit over budget. The Daily Mail goes for the Legionnaires' disease story, and the Daily Telegraph and the Times have different versions of Mrs. Thatcher's problems. CBI chiefs there, Mrs. Thatcher, and the Cabinet there. That's the Saturday morning reading. That's all from us for this week. Join us again at the usual time on Monday. Until then, have a nice weekend from David and me and all of us. Good night.
Now on to Anouka Hempel is the lady with the job of seeing us safely through from Friday night to Saturday morning.
Friday night, Saturday morning, 5 yesterday's gone, there's a weekend dawning. Friday night, Saturday morning at last. Pack up your troubles then, Monday's the day for them. Oh, it's time to relax again. Friday night,
evening. I'm Anouka Hempel, and my guests tonight come from the two worlds that I've been involved with for the past few years. That's acting and design. As you may or may not know, I've been interested in design and designing since I was 10. I was brought up in Australia, 500 miles from anywhere, and it wasn't until I got a peep at other people's homes that I realized how much I'd missed and how much the way other people's things looked mattered to me. So, there are 3 designers who are world famous and whose achievements I admire because of their amazing creative talents and their business acumen. These 2 qualities seldom run together, but when they do, the results are sensational. I hope to question them sympathetically because I've got some knowledge of my own work as a designer, of the problems that they've had to face. Then, turning to the other side of my life, it's nice to have Gloria Swanson, who has taken her looks and life very seriously, and in her new book, Swanson on Swanson, gives us a fully detailed, no-holds-barred account of her life in the old-style Hollywood. In comparison, we have the new star of the 80s, the amazing Sissy Spacek, who doesn't take herself so seriously as a new-style movie star, and who regards the razzmatazz of show business as the most superficial part of her career. Last but not least, a dear friend who has influenced me greatly, who combines both worlds, Canada Lysa Green. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my first guest, the lady who is the embodiment of ancient Hollywood legend, Gloria Swanson. Doesn't she look fantastic? Amazing.
Well, you say that as if I
Unbelievable.
shouldn't.
Well, I haven't met you before, you see, and I
Well,
wasn't
I
too
know.
sure.
No, but you know how
It's
everybody expects me to walk in? Shall I
Well,
make another
Not
entrance?
on crutches, I hope. No, we can't. We haven't got time to do it again.
All right, fine.
Gloria, listen, you're 82. You've been part of the...
I'm going to be 82 this month in a few weeks. Don't rush
I'm
it.
sorry. 81.
The 27th of this month.
Oh, my God, you're an Aries.
Yes, of course.
Oh,
Can't you tell?
No, not
With
particularly.
these
Tell me, how
horns
can-
of mine?
You've
Oh,
disguised
sure.
them well tonight.
Oh,
I can't tell
yes.
at all. Now, something about your biography. With all the amazing things you've done in your life, and with your private life being fairly public, how on earth did you get started? Whereabouts did you start?
Didn't I tell you in the book?
I haven't read it all.
You
I haven't had
been
time.
peeping in it?
Oh, I peeped, but
Uh-huh.
I haven't started. I don't know how
Well,
you
it
got
was an
started.
accident. Actually, it was way back when. I can't see the audience, so I don't know whether they were around or not. I doubt it. I'm sure I'm the oldest one right in the room at the moment. I seem to be. I know I am when I'm in Hollywood. I'm always the oldest. But I went to visit a studio in Chicago at the S&A. And in those days, they didn't have casting bureaus. So I happened to say, isn't this exciting? I was just a youngster, 14 and a half. And 3 people grabbed me and said, what's your name and your telephone number? Because not having any casting bureaus, they could never call up and say, send 200 or 100 extras in evening clothes or in armor. And so they used their friends, their relatives, and people right off the street. So when they heard me say, isn't this wonderful, they thought, aha, we've got another captive.
Right. And but that's not where your book started, is it? I mean, you've
Oh,
gone
no,
back.
no, I
so
was
you've gone
born
back 3
before
or
that.
4.
And I was,
Oh, really? Glad
I'll
about
give you
that.
an idea of how I arrived in a blizzard.
Right.
In Chicago. Wouldn't you know I'd arrive in a blizzard?
Well...
Screaming my head off.
Well, most of them did at that stage because of the smack on the bottom.
No, I did it before the smack.
Oh, really?
Yes.
You must have really upset your mother in that case, then.
I imagine I did.
Now, with some of the movies you made, some of the titles, like Don't Change Your Husbands, or
There was
Why
not a
Change Your
likely-
Wife, or Trespassers, and Indiscreet, and Dark Victory. I mean,
Dark
you must
Victory, I didn't do
Didn't you
that.
do?
No, that's the one that why I left California.
Oh, you left California?
Because of not being permitted to
excuse
do
me.
Dark Victory.
Well, then all the other ones, it seems to me as if all the titles of these amazing movies that you were making sort of had something to do with your private life at the time. I mean, they all sort of...
Well, I don't think Don't Change Your Husband had anything to do with my life.
But you've been changing your husbands every 5 minutes.
I know,
ever
but
since we
it
can
says
remember.
don't change your husband, so it had
So you
nothing
went
to-
against the grain?
No, of course,
Why
I'm a
change your
rebel.
wife? So
Yes, and Why Change Your Wife? Well, that was a sequel to the first one. And it was a very exciting idea in those days because Mr. DeMille was the first person to introduce any kind of story about married people. Up until that time, every movie Does anyone remember what I'm talking about?
We will when you're finished, don't worry.
Every picture finished with either an engagement ring or a wedding band or church bells ringing. But
It sounds like as if you were just doing business deals the whole time.
I beg
with your marriages. I mean, there didn't seem to be any moral commitment from you, as if you were just.
Well,
as you
of
made your
course, that's
movie
why I
there.
was married, because of a moral commitment.
But how could you get out of your own moral commitment so freely and so frequently?
Did you say immoral or moral?
No, I said moral. I said moral.
No, the reason I married so many times is because of the code in those days. There was no
Because
such
of the code.
Well, everybody had to be married.
Yeah, but that's what you thought. But you didn't follow it through. You didn't continue.
Yes, I did. I
Well, one
married every
after the
time.
other.
Yes,
you did.
yes.
My goodness. And who was running neck and neck with you at that stage of the game? Who was your competition in those days? Anybody?
In marriage?
No, they both went together, your business and your marriage. You sort of all sort of...
No, it didn't.
Is there anybody?
No, it didn't go with my business. That was the problem. I was looking for somebody to help me with all of that, and I never found one.
Not ever?
Yes, once.
Who was that?
Well, that's in the book, and you're going to have to read it.
Oh, you are so mean, but I haven't got time. Well, I will read it.
You haven't
I will read.
time.
I will read it. I'll go through it and get my facts straight next time. But Gloria, what your attitude, from my point of view, sort of going through the reviews of your book, you seem very masculine.
That's the last thing I am.
Really?
I have a masculine mind, let's hope.
Yes. Well, that's obviously interfered with being feminine at that stage.
No, it never did.
Really?
My masculine mind did not run my body.
But it must have, because you were so bright and because you were...
No, I wasn't so bright.
You weren't.
I was a very... I wouldn't have made so many mistakes had I been bright.
No, I don't know that you can regard them all as mistakes. Now, if you had to come back as a... If you had to come back as a man...
I would
how
prefer
you?
that because I work
Or-
like a man.
Well...
So, now look, when you pack, look what men do. A hanging bag, one suit, maybe an extra suit. Then they have their shaving kit.
Yeah, and...
That's about it. When I pack, you can imagine.
Well, we heard that's why you were late. You lost your bag or something, is that right?
No, I was late because we went to the wrong place, having been...
And
it wasn't our fault. We were told to go to BBC, and we did. Was I late?
Oh, my God, you got here in an unbelievable time.
I
then, all
know
the way
it.
from Shepherd's
Yeah, we
Bush.
did. That's where we went.
Oh, my goodness.
And I couldn't direct anybody because I didn't know where I was going, really.
Now, quite a controversial thing for me that comes out of your book is your attitude to...
Hasn't read it.
I've read, I've been briefed very carefully. Don't you get me? Is your attitude to abortion that seemed to me very far ahead of your time at the time? How did you cope with? I mean, how did you?
I
cope
didn't
with
cope
that?
with it. I'm
That
still
must-
living with it.
Is that something that has really upset you
Yes,
during
very
the
much.
past years?
Very much. Because until I can really know when there's life, and some people, I have letters, when they say that life only comes into the embryo when it takes its first breath. I don't believe this.
Why
See,
not?
Well, why should it? Because
No,
how...
but why don't you believe it?
Well, I'd like to believe it. It would ease my conscience. But I can't because I don't... Logically, it doesn't sound right to me.
Yes.
Because this thing grows, and I think it comes with conception, life.
Right. Well, then you in
That's
those
why
early...
it had been agonizing to me.
Well, in those, maybe that's why you've concentrated on looking after your body and looking after yourself because of the abuse that you directed at yourself in those early years.
Well,
by the
maybe
awful
that, and
abortions
maybe
you
my
had.
interest in youngsters and children and orphanages have something to do with it, too.
Right. Well, Gloria Swanson, it's been lovely having you on the
Thank
show.
you very
I'm
much.
sorry if I got a few things wrong, but that's how it is.
But that's
Thank
all
you
right.
very much indeed. Gloria. Now, from Hollywood as it used to be to Hollywood now, because my next guest is another American film actress, Sissy Spacek, star of Carrie, Badlands, Heartbeat, and Three Women. Her latest film opened last night to rave reviews. In The Coal Miner's Daughter, she plays a country singer, Loretta Lynn.
Well, I was born the coal miner's daughter in a cabin on a hill in Butcher Holler. We were poor, but we had love. That's the one thing my daddy made sure of. He shoveled coal to make a poor man's dollar. Daddy loved and raised 8 kids on the miner's pay. Mommy scrubbed our clothes on a washboard every day. Well, I've seen her fingers bleed. To complain, there was no need. She'd smile in Mommy's understanding way. In the summertime, we didn't have shoes to wear, but in the wintertime, we'd all get a brand new pair. From a mail-order catalog, money made from selling a hog, Daddy always managed to get the money somewhere. Yeah, I'm proud to be a coal miner's daughter. I remember well the well where I drew water. The work we done was hard. At night we'd sleep 'cause we were tired. I never thought of ever leaving Butcher Holler.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sissy Spacek.
We meet each other in the most unlikely place. I didn't know I was going to see her today.
Aha, surprise.
It's a nice, lovely surprise.
You couldn't tell with your antennae out
No,
that
I
this was going
couldn't.
to
I
happen?
didn't know.
Love, wonderful. Sissy, welcome to the show. And bear with me, it's the first time I've done it, and you might have to interview me or Gloria at this stage.
I
of the
was
game.
talking to Gloria backstage. Miss Swanson, forgive me.
I beg your pardon.
We've met 3 times now,
So
so
it's
maybe we'll be on a first-name basis.
Of course.
I asked her, I was so nervous, and I asked her if she had ever gotten used to this, and she said no, so I'm nervous.
Wow, so are we all.
Yes,
Do we-
I am.
Well,
I'll relax in a
Sissy,
bit.
everything's going fantastically well for you. I mean, it's just flying along. We don't ever hear too much about the bad times when somebody starts to do something. I mean, how was it in the beginning of with your career? I mean, how long did it take you to actually make the break?
Oh, it really happened quite quickly for me. I was in New York about 4 years seeking my fortune before anything happened, but the most difficult, you'll have to forgive me, I've been flying, I've been all over Europe this week. I started this time last week, and if I give the wrong answers to the right questions, you'll
Oh, no, I can assure you it'll be the other way around. Don't worry about it. Now, your very early ambitions apparently were to be a singer. So you must have really fulfilled a dream to have come this far, to have done your own songs.
It's funny. I went to New York, and I was there 4 years trying to be a singer, and it really didn't pan out for me, and film work became my first love because it came more easily for me, and it was nice to get to do Coal Miner's Daughter because I was able to pull my guitar out.
Absolutely. And when did you know that you wanted to be an actress? Was it at the time when you were in Texas and you were a cheerleader? Did it all start then? What was the one little thing that actually said, aha, I've got to be the most famous thing? Or maybe you didn't say it. You said
I used to have 3 wishes, and they were to be beautiful, to be...
that's number 1.
Thank you. To be loved, and to have 1,000,000 more wishes. But I think that I first, my family noticed signs of me wanting to be an actress when I would come home with the first grade with a story to read to my mother, and she would be in at the stove just cooking away and busy with my other brothers, and I'd say, Mother, I have to read you this story, it's my homework, and she'd say, honey, why don't you go and sit in front of the mirror in my room and read to yourself?
Oh, so
and I think that's how it started. I've been reading to myself ever since.
Oh, God, and to the rest of us, thank goodness, ever since. Now, how much does it take out of you when you're actually working? Are you really into the part so that you live it into your everyday life beyond when you leave the studio? Are you tense and uptight a lot of the time, or can you separate?
No, usually it's every time. I don't know about you, but it seems like every director I work with, it changes the way I work. Yeah. But usually I try to, well, for instance, on Coal Miners, I talked like Loretta all the time, and when she came on set, the crew were so accustomed to me talking like Loretta that they thought Loretta sounded like me.
Oh, well, you're doing well. Film stars are sort of, in Gloria's day, were treated very differently than they are today. How do you think that you would have coped with Gloria's razzmatazz and the whole sort of PR pushing, shoving thing of old Hollywood and the whole notorious side of the movie business in those days?
Well,
how would you have coped?
I think that Gloria had probably much more pressure. There were more pressures. Nowadays, the studio system has changed, so, and you've got, like she was saying, that the moral code was you